All right, I just woke up.
You know, this word desire is such a huge word in my mind.
This is a way to pleasure activism. It could be.
She feared evaporation.
And I had bent my back like that for an angry bird that bit me.
I have to have the choice of the cinema that I want.
What does the feral domestic, mean to you?
Hey everybody, welcome. Welcome to UnionDocs. Thank you so much, those of you who are here in the room, in our live studio audience, and also, of course, to those who are out there on Twitch. Super great to have you involved in this event, this three-ring circus that we're putting on. We're streaming to you in kind of a DIY studio from the south side of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, aka Los Sures. And we've been experimenting with this kind of event through the pandemic, and it's been lots of fun. We've got a new team working with us, and seems like everything's going to work out just fine, but we may have some technical difficulties. We'll see. Juan Pedro, we miss you, but I think we're going to be good tonight. Is anybody in this room been to UnionDocs? Like this the first time you're at UnionDocs? Yeah? Awesome. Welcome. We are a Center for Documentary Art. We are a nonprofit. We present and produce documentary. And now I think we kind of make like little TV shows, apparently. Tonight's program celebrates the work. It's a year later from a very special research collab that we put together with an amazing group of artists who you'll have a chance to meet in just a second. We have one of them in the room tonight. And I think 7 others joining us online. Last winter, we came together through this program with generous leadership from collaborative artists Dani and Sheilah ReStack. And the participants came from all over the world. And while we were sheltering at home, we used the kind of forced reduction of our world as a space in which to imagine new realities. And with an impulse towards eschewing perfection and making freely a body of work from, making freely a body of work from the group emerged. And this will be the first time that we're sharing these experiences, this collection of work, inspired from a lab, from all the lab participants. We will also tonight be giving you a glimpse of what we discovered together by hearing some of the wisdom that was passed on through some of the visiting guests that were programmed in by the ReStacks. This was an amazing selection of artists and writers that inspired the work of the participating artists. And so we'll have some short samples of their presentations and some really inspiring ideas and quotations. So we really can't say enough about how much the ReStacks gave to this program and how inspiring it is to work with them as accomplished artists who share themselves so generously and share their practice so generously. We think the artists that had the good fortune to be a part of this group also agree with that. So tonight we're toasting to everyone, to the ideas, the energy, and the feelings produced through this lab, and especially to the feral. So now we're going to hand over digitally to the ReStacks and hopefully hear from them now.
Yay! We're sharing our gratitude for UnionDocs and what UnionDocs has done and does. And we're thankful to Jenny and Christopher and Harrison and Allison, and for everybody coming out and all these people. We love being together with this collab group.
Take 2 on this anniversary toast to the community of this lab, and where our investigation of feral domestic led in many different directions. For myself, I started out thinking of the feral as an opposing force to the domestic, as something that could activate a staid or predictable kind of space, a sort of reanimation, a movement through time of what was available with what was at hand, a way of taking that to craft something counter to, unintelligible to dominant tropes of heteropatriarchal imperialist systems of sense, order, family, relation. All this is and certainly can be true, but I also began to understand, particularly through the work of this lab, my own desire for a kind of binary of tidiness and allowance of the feral and domestic to make space for something unpredictable but articulable. And Edward Glissant states in Poetics of Relation that, quote, poetics of relation remain forever conjectural and presuppose no ideological stability. It is against the comfortable assurances linked to the supposed excellence of language, unquote. So in celebration and anticipation of that which is articulable, that which is audible, and that which is not, I am really excited to share the work of the wonderful humans who are here gathered this evening and highlight some of the guests that we invited in.
Yeah, hi, I'm Julie. We've been asked to tell you who we are, where we are, and what we've been doing at home. So my name is Julie. I'm in Bloomington, Indiana, and I've been finishing my dissertation that I'm defending soon. So, yay.
Hi, my name's Emily. I'm in West Peterborough, New Hampshire, and I've been watching birds return and waiting for leaf out.
Hi, my name is Kim, and I'm here in Ithaca, New York. And yeah, I've been studying in the Disability Studies program at City University of New York this year.
Hi, I'm Emma Reasoner, and I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and I've been trying to write songs for the first time. Pass the mic over to Lauren.
I'm in Saugus, Massachusetts, and I walk dogs for a living, which is amazing. I've been fostering cats, and we fostered a pit, a glorious, the most athletic baby you've ever encountered, and it was the Olympics of dog. Very inspiring. I love it.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rushford. I'm in Portland, Oregon. So glad to see you all once again. And at home, I've been reading books backwards to my daughter, and that's been really strange and fun, among other things.
Hi, I'm Gia, and I am living and working in Brooklyn, New York. I'm at UnionDocs right now with...
Hi, I'm Harrison. I'm actually not an artist in this group, but I was helping out Dani and Sheilah administrate this group.
Okay, so good to see everyone. And the first voice we're going to bring into the conversation is Steve Reinke's. I met Steve Reinke in 2001 at the University of Illinois in Chicago. He was one of my teachers, and one of the things that he said that none of my other professors ever did was that one does not have to know what their intentions are when they're making work, and that has a lot of repercussions, and it stayed with me for 20 years. Reinke wrote about the feral domestic for the Undue Fellowship, and in it he shared a definition that could be one of what feral domestic is.
Literally, the feral is when an animal or plant that was once domesticated returns to a non-domesticated or wild space. But more specifically, it's hard not to have the feral larger mythic background as a kind of failed return to the prelapsarian. That is, once there was, especially in Judeo-Christian mythologies, but in other ones as well, place where there was no sin, no shame, a Garden of Eden, and part of being feral, or even just being something like a hippie, would be a want to return to that which seemed to have taken away from us after we've fallen, a return back to a prelapsarian time, back to the Garden of Eden. The feral is, I think, different from, to put it in the crassest terms, the hippie urge to tune in, drop out, return back to the prelapsarian. it recognizes that perhaps that isn't possible. And it's a different state that lies between the impossibility of a return to the prelapsarian and a kind of complacency or satisfaction with being human. It actually came to me late and came to me mainly through the ReStack work, was that touch replaces vision as a dominant mode of perception, of knowing and being in the world. So even though, as you saw, the ReStack videos are full of vibrant images, nonetheless, I would still maintain that touch or the haptic quality remains kind of dominant. So for the ReStacks, their interest in the feral is a way of living as a lesbian family with a child. There's specifically the feral domestic, making certain spaces, making certain ways of living and myths. And that's where we're beginning.
Seeing the compilation that UnionDocs is putting out of all the artists and writers from the Undo collaborative project that we got to be a part of with Steib and so many other talented artists and writers. In thinking through the construction of this lab, we divided it into chapters with artists speaking to participants and also solo and collaborative exercises. The first chapter kind of designation was desire and ritual. So the next voice that we're going to hear from is Miguel Gutierrez.
This word desire is such a huge word in my mind, and it's so at the center of like kind of everything for me. I'm like, I don't understand how you can you distinguish desire from any making? Like, I don't even understand that you would, but improvisation kind of as like a formal strategy to allow for a different kind of idea about desire. Yeah, so just kind of like just a very easy demonstration of, after watching all these kind of like beautiful, flowy, kind of like, correct weight, correct the bodies, traversing the space in these kind of like abstract ways, I was like, I want to get into like fucking. I want to get into like, what is like live abstract fucking look like, and again, I wouldn't necessarily been able to use that language at the time, and I certainly wasn't the only person who was thinking those ways.
That was wonderful. And then our next guest who joined the collab was Michael Morris, an astrologer, facilitator, artist, writer, friend, educator. I've had the good fortune of being introduced to Michael through their work at Denison, where we both teach. And I know a student who has had a class with Michael because they use language like ecosexual, and it's like, oh yeah, you must
an identity of ecosexual. They will name themselves that way.
Yeah. So and so I've been very grateful for his sort of influence, and I'm also constantly finding inspiration for how Michael thinks through the body in ways that challenge me. There's quotations from interviews with Michael, such as, quote, "The body is not a vessel for our experience, it is the source of our experience." Or this one from an interview with Mary Grace, "Our wounds are not just our own." And also the idea of feeling more as opposed to feeling good. So
here's
Michael Morris.
But thinking just in terms of like the human body is already populated by countless species. We call this the human microbiome, such that like you are not purely human, neither am I. What we call the human body is full of bacteria and viruses and protists and protozoans, like living species that do not have human DNA, which means what we call the human is already run through with the more than human. We are already more than human. And so feral domesticity feels like maybe directing us towards the unlearning or the disruption or the dismantling of those seeds of the oppressor that we carry into our private spaces, perhaps by way of accessing the parts of ourselves that were already more than human.
They are great. I will say a little story next about Dani Komogen. Sheilah and I were at the Athens, Ohio Film Festival, and she went into one theater to see all the cities of the North, and I went into another theater to watch a shorts program. And all of a sudden, my phone is blowing up. Sheila's texting me and says, come over here. You have to see this film. And that was the beginning of our relationship with Dani Komodjan's work. And it's been very fruitful. And one of the things we talked about in the collab was paying homage, an approach that works in opposition to ripping others off or being competitive. An example, we were working on A Hand in Two Ways Fisted, and we reenacted a haircut straight from Dani's film, and then hammered a red tarp over the kitchen window to create a red glow the way Dani did in his film. So we invited Dani to our conversation about the feral domestic for this collab, tying his work to Donna Haraway's theory that the way to survive the future on this planet is by collaboration. Dani says that cinema cannot exist without people working together.
For me, it's always very practical, you know, like you have this body, you have, you know, this human, you have this donkey, you have this building, the tree, what to do with that. And then you try to find ways to see them. You look at it and you're offering it to someone after that. And of course you want to make it beautiful. You know, you want to make it special and you want to be like, okay, but it is this thing, this moment is worth looking at. It's worth, you know, like you should spend time with this. And I think the beauty is like, hey, take a look at this and think about it. Because otherwise, yeah, why would you? Now is like this idea of like, how can we actually imagine different futures from the ones that's like sort of, yeah, repeated to us all the time.
We're now going to watch the program from participants in the collab inspired by some of these guests and ideas. We'll see 4 short pieces with works by Emily Drury, Sarah Rushford, and collaborative work by Julie Hegarat, Lauren Flinner, Valerie Salez, and Daphne Shu.
I'm already in this, so obviously you can play with it.
So obviously you're first.
I want to do something with the mirror.
Okay.
I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, are you also going to be virginal like Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's... I think it'd be interesting to have this weird blending of like bodies and stuff in terms of the Virgin Mary.
So you want to do like a double exposure, or is that what you say? Or you want to have similar pattern that plays twice?
Like a similar...
Okay.
I don't... Like the double exposure is not... I don't...
You don't like it?
No, it's fine, but it's a little bit cliche for me. I don't know.
Okay, so you just want the same scenario happening twice, like
Yeah.
once with you, once with me. Okay. That works for me. We're gonna have to tie up your hair.
I know.
Julie le Hegarat. Julie le Hegarat.
So good to see that work again.
Amazing.
Yeah. So here's a question for you guys. What rituals would you propose to someone who wanted to explore ritual and desire?
I'm not quite sure how to answer to the part about desire. I think it's been such a weird time to be inside so much and to see so few people, which hasn't been super stimulating. What I can say, though, that's been some kind of solace. I've been doing karaoke at home. This microphone is really great because also there's an echo voice thing. It's been super liberating, and I've actually started sending microphones to my friends when they're sad. And I think it's just a great release to kind of connect to the body, to the voice, and to, get moving, get happy. So that would be my ritual.
Mine kind of relates because I guess my ritual, I was thinking about this as a person with obsessive compulsive disordered tendencies at the very least. I think that my relationship to ritual is sort of like, I think I spend a lot of my day sort of contemplating the physicality of my body in space in relation to the different things that are happening near me, almost like dance. Like I say as someone who has not studied dance, but it feels dance-like to me. This sort of like anxious concern that I have for the way things are moving with each other. So what I've tried doing recently, I've just been calling it weird yoga, which is sort of a combination between it's like a blend of meditation, exercise, and dance. And it's just moving your body however you want it, and like letting yourself grunt and sweat and stretch. And I found that very, very healing as someone who I think puts a lot of stress on myself to contain my body and to be sort of rigid, to kind of ritualize a no pressure kind of movement brought me back to my body. So that's what I recommend, weird yoga.
Awesome.
Recently, as well as when we were working in the collab, I am always drawn to experimenting with text. That's definitely something that can be done in the home, and it's very versatile. So experimenting with text, sometimes I mean reading things backwards. Sometimes I mean being very patient with a phrase or a sentence and using it to think about for a long time. Or reading things aloud in the home is always a way to kind of make things transcendent. I'd suggest those to somebody who wanted to do a ritual. Thanks.
I've been thinking about just the strangeness of this time and how distinct time is feeling, and looking for ways that language and familiar language and familiar objects can be made strange as a way to sort of meet or match those conditions. And sometimes it's bringing together a phrase, an intention, and some, in this case, household domestic object like houseplants into a new space, or inviting them into a daily ritual, and finding ways to kind of disrupt the order of things in the home, and then disrupt language a little bit too, and defamiliarize both together.
Well, then we'll go on to chapter 2, House Becomes You.
But thank you so much for those responses. And yeah, it just feels like each of those like really responds to the time that we're in and the sort of dislocation of our bodies in space, and how to kind of open that up or find something freeing inside of it. So thank you. Okay. Oh, okay. For this chapter, Moira Davey was an early guest. Mother Reader was perhaps the first work of Moira Davies that both Dani and I encountered. And I remember at the time feeling really grateful to her for having written into a space that felt empty of articulation of experience or even possibility. I appreciated her thinking towards the multiplicities of artist, being artist, writer, mother. And I love the movement of Moira's making, whether it's an edited video, a sequence of images in a book, an illustrated slide talk about one artist through another, a photograph hung with objects, an image carried through the mail and re-encountered. There's an unapologetic curiosity in ranging through time and material. Moira shared 3 works with the collab where she explores history and her own movements through her domestic space as she untangles and remakes relation to family in the past.
I've never questioned the idea of like showing this domestic space. I'm technically not a studio artist because I've honestly never had a studio that I liked. I've always preferred to work, I don't know, I'm kind of like a cat. I just sort of, I move around and I settle wherever. And a lot of it has to do with the light. It affects me a lot. And so I work with it, I shoot with it, but I do everything else kind of in relation to the light. I always found studios kind of isolating, which of course they're meant to be, but I was never able to make it work for me.
The next series of works is by Laura Conway, and then a collaboration by Emily Drury and Emma Reisner, then Kim McDaniel, Daniel, and Lauren Flinner.
Says Quinn, Izzy. Oh, Izzy, you killed a mouse today. That was intense. Izzy, all I want you to do is hug it. It's all about you. Izzy, want you to see me here. In the world. Izzy, you're my favorite girl. 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 Kat came over to be with me as soon as I had paused and looked at the portal. It's on my computer. She's so lovely. I am experiencing thoughts that don't want to be sentences but are still true. Something about windows. A flat plane with an edge into nothing. The bird story I told Amanda. She and her cat made a display, and I had bent my back like that for an angry bird that bit me. Une table, a landscape, 2-point perspective tunnel, frames in white and black, analog chemicals and burnt tree or other animal and plant materials, calmly dancing eyes, tracing lines, invisibilities, a fall cold versus February. I feel stomach gravity and dizzy, and am sorry I was so distracted. The green bird spill.
When I must go, no tears in time. We kiss and
shortness of breath. When I breathe in, I can feel it in my lungs, like. Yeah, I did. Any body aches? Yeah. We got a good dose of this. How about headaches? Yeah. Yeah, so I thought it was grief that was making me so tired, but one day, but I watched TV all day, so I might have just been stupid from watching TV all day. Yeah, I went to my friend's house on February 26th. And we had dinner. I was unmasked. It was 3 people. Well, I just didn't know. I thought I was just tired, and yeah, I didn't know I had it.
Using the tablet to watch TV. Can you watch TV on the tablet that you have? Okay. Well, you go ahead, and if you ever want to watch a movie, just have them come in. That's what they're there for. Don't hesitate. Okay? You deserve to be able to be cared for. Okay. Hello, this is Jenny Bramhall calling, and I am Stuart Conway's wife. Hello. Hey, I wondered if you could help Stuart a little bit. 2 things I'm very concerned about. One is that he hasn't taken a shower since he's been there. He's afraid to take a shower. And he's afraid of the pain of getting undressed. He's afraid of falling. And I just think maybe you guys might have noticed that. I think he's been there like a week. And I think you should get someone to help him take a shower. And then the other thing is, he's in isolation and he's eating in his room. And he's struggling to have a comfortable way to eat his meal. He needs a table and a chair that he can sit at to eat a meal. He can't be like sitting on like a little side tray table. He's 67 years old. He has dyskinesia where he can't control his movements well. So I would really appreciate it if you would try to find a setup where he can sit at a chair on a chair with a table to eat his meal. Could you try to work on that? Thank you very much. Bye. When they say Queen Bey, like Beyonce, is it B-E-E or B-E-Y? Why? All right, should I go? Yeah. Huh?
Who has ever seen hell or purgatory? They assure us that they are safe.
love affair started long, long ago. This love survived the ages, in its story loves the pages, feel them up, moused and slow.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing that work. It was really beautiful to see. I think in the comments at one point, somebody said how great it is to re-see this work and kind of experience it anew. And I completely agree with that sentiment. A question that we have here is speaking to a moment when your perception or idea of home changed. And I mean, these questions are really starting points. So if there's something else you feel compelled to speak about based on what we've just seen, that's fine too. This is a kind of catalyst question.
Yeah, so how my perception of home has changed. I just have been thinking that over the last 3 years, I've really been moving in between New York and Milwaukee, moved to New York, then the pandemic happened, moved back to Milwaukee, which I thought was home, felt was home for a long time for me. Now I'm back out here in New York. And so it's kind of, yeah, when I was back in Milwaukee last spring during the residency, I had to go home to my parents, I grew up, to my parents' house. And then when I came back to Milwaukee, I was talking to a friend and they were like, oh, so, are you home now? And I was like, oh no, like I'm back in Milwaukee. And he was like, oh, like, that's what I meant. Like, cause he was thinking that my home was Milwaukee, but I was really confused because at the time I was still thinking that home was like my childhood, like my parents' house. And actually both of those locations aren't true because actually my home was New York because I was like at that point like a resident of New York. So it was like, I just think like moving around so much over the last 3 years due to the pandemic has created a real instability in terms of how I view home and what that means for my work too.
Yeah, this question made me think about instability as well, Kim. When Emily and I made this video a year ago, I was coming up on 1 year since I had moved in with some friends who like had their own nuclear family that I came and joined their house. And, this question reminded me about how when we were making this video, I was kind of wrestling with that that dynamic change. We did a work trade instead of rent, and so I'd never really like lived that way, and it was a lot of respite that came with that, but also there was like a trading, I think, of different kinds of precarity. Where your house, instead of being the place that you have worked your job and made your money to have the roof over your house, it became like dependent on a relationship. And there is like a lot of beauty in that. And also like, yeah, just like a different kind of precarity in a way. And so, thinking about like what happens if this relationship changes, what happens if their children grow up and, reclaim their space, and when that happens. And yeah, so that was kind of like a new way to experience home.
I think that home for me was always a sort of an idea for the future for a long time. And it was sort of because I had a relationship to, or I associated home with this sort of like stasis, this kind of perfection that I would arrive at. And I think that the pandemic and honestly participating in this lab was really transformative for me. I was not ready, I think, when we first gathered, like I wasn't ready for for the ways that these artists would challenge me. So I really appreciate that. Like, but specifically, I guess I mean like a year and a half ago, I also had like a pulmonary embolism that was, I had a near-death experience, and I think that kind of reframed the way I think about home and even like time in general. Less of a series of accomplished tasks to accomplish, less of something to prove to different people, and more of, okay, wait, this is real, and this is about that kind of intensity that comes when you are super present and are able to, meet people as you are and accept people for who they are and see what that kind of interaction means. So for me, like home became this idea about just like the present moment, I think, and how you're always, or I guess I was just reframing the way I approach things from this kind of like sort of super capitalist, I think, like intense, like got to be productive, got to be like climbing the steps, got to be reaching the next whatever, and instead, maybe it's more about, we don't have everything figured out, but here we are together.
I'm thinking about the kind of the woods and landscape and space where I grew up and live now. My awareness of those changing, and weather patterns changing, plant communities shifting, and being witness to that right now. So this sort of present that we're sharing, such radical change that's not always perceptible, but is incremental and then sometimes very dramatic in terms of the climate, and that as a shared home is strikes me, and I feel like when Emma and I had the privilege of collaborating, having never met in person and writing to each other, collecting images to share, that sort of blurring of interior and exterior space was an integral part of that process.
Thanks so much for all of those responses, and I'm just I love hearing how all of you are talking about it, and it feels like I just like feel this sort of like humility before the, in front of the word, because it can just be, it can mean so many different things, and it should. So I really appreciate that kind of how you guys have spoken to it. The next and last chapter that we're going to be speaking to here is new mythologies, and we are going to start with Beatriz Santiago Munoz's work. We found the poetry in Beatriz Santiago Munoz's work and the immediacy of it and the way she joins people to place really inspiring both Dani and I. And as a group, you were working to create new mythologies, ones that offered ways towards liberation. Santiago Munoz's work, La Cava Negra, seemed a new mythology in this way. Munoz found that indigenous people had been living on land in Puerto Rico, and it had been used as a burial ground for thousands of years before the contemporary bridges and automobile infrastructure was built. She investigated that, and there was an understanding of a revealing of the past and also allowing it to be energetic, flow as it entered the present through the moving image. We asked her about how in the film the boys appeared looking for their horse, and Munoz started to work with them to create a video that tracked their interaction as well as this sort of like movement through time. And we really admire how Munoz found ways of working that invited these types of unknown outcome collaborations. And we also think of this as another way to invent into the future. And so here we have Beatriz Santiago Munoz speaking of her work.
The idea of the encounter and like the surprise that is possible in the encounter with somebody else is also a way to step outside of yourself, of the creation of a new language, you know? I just think of it as like stepping outside of the ways that your eye has been trained, you know? Just like neurologically, like the more you think a thought, the more your neurons, you know, like reinforce that path. And so sometimes thinking, how do I not think that is the worst thing you can do, because how do I not do that includes the thought of what you don't want to do. You have to completely go in another direction, step outside the door and keep walking until, you know, an elephant lands on top of you. In a way, you know, like until you are, you know, you have something that you did not think about, it steps in front.
The next person who will speak to us for a moment is Rosine Mabakam. We met her through the Cine Tracks program at the Wexner Center for the Arts. And she studied film in Brussels and shared an experience where she went home to the Cameroon to make a film about her mother and realized that she had to decolonize her own gaze. And here she speaks to the group about seeing a Western director shoot footage of an African female subject.
She had the eyes down like this, and you can see the violation of the camera. And I was like, oh my God, is how I, as African, has been filmed by the West all the time without asking if they can film or not. And it reminds me of my story and the colonization and all the things. And I make the link that I didn't have the choice of my representation, the choice of my story. I didn't have the choice at all. And in that moment, I said to myself that I have to have the choice of the cinema that I want to do. It is in that moment that I started my process of decolonization. And I started by saying that I know now what I'm here to learn,
The next group of work is by Sarah Rushford and Gonzales, Gabby Steib, and Valerie Salez.
Once upon a time, there was a kingdom ruled by a king and queen, and the queen gave birth to 3 princes.
Once upon a road, there was a gun and its food, the pain, and its girl had just given birth to 3 beliefs. But the hungry thing was that they were born with a centrifuge.
Each of them was born with a strange birthmark, a little gold star on each of their foreheads. An evil witch came to the castle and told them the stars were a curse that would only bring terror and ruin to the kingdom.
Confused about the toilet, the king called in its doctor, who was a son of a photograph, and he took one look at these ideas and informed the tool that this was terrible red. This was very bad red, and that the cause of this red was disquiet.
The king believed the witch and banished the princes from the kingdom. He buried the queen up to her breasts in the ground under a bridge, and he married the witch, making her queen.
The king became so hammered by this that it buried its wife in the mud with only its breasts exposed, and it cast out the 3 notions.
A farmer saw the 3 boys, with a star on each of their foreheads, abandoned in the countryside, and he rescued them and raised them as his own. He sent them to school in the city, but the farmer made sure they always wore bandanas over their foreheads to hide the star birthmarks.
The king remembered suckling the breeder of his motor, which he did till he was a young brag. This filled him with chard, for he longed to suckle breeders to this dead beat.
On their way to school, they would cross a bridge into the city, and each time they did, a small stream of liquid shot out of the ground and entered their mouths. It was sweet and delicious.
The thresholds were very beautiful, and every timing they would pass by the pole, they would notice something sweet hit their eyelids in their movies, and it was always a sovereign of strike for them.
Why was this happening to them, they thought. Each time we go into town, a liquid shoots out of the ground, and it tastes sweet, they told the farmer father.
Could this be why he buried the willingness in the muffler, leaving her breeders exposed? Because he was ashamed?
Well, I've been waiting to tell you this. I am not your real father. I found you in the countryside. You are 3 princes, he tells them.
One deaconess, the hatred is outside of the lubricant as the 3 come walking by, and swelling list hits the liquors of the idiocies, and they realize that the sweetness that is hitting their movies is the breeder milliliter of their motive.
The liquid shooting out of the ground into your mouths is the breast milk of your mother. She is buried under the bridge.
Buried and without aggressor, what she could do was shoot breeder milliliter at them, to feed them, yes, and as a signpost that she was their motive.
Whenever you pass, the breast milk shoots into your mouth, he told them.
Some think breeder milliliter shooting out is apocryphal, but anyone who's given birth will tell you it's real. Once you're lactating, you can totally squirrel your booking, and the milliliter can shoot out in a tiny strength all the wean across the rosary.
The boys went into town and asked to speak to the king. They took off their bandanas, and the king was shocked to see that these were his 3 sons.
After realizing his cruise, the fatherland turns himself in and dogs 5 yearnings in an intense cellar program that teaches him to live without shandy.
He realized what good boys he had. Then the sons told him that a farmer raised them, and their mother was buried under the bridge and gave them breast milk.
The 2 divulge and both lead happy lives, raising the boycotts and shillings, with Tingle to rest home in between, and with the added flight they can earn enough monitor and wound less.
Years after his horrible treatment of his wife and family, the king was moved by this display of motherly love. He confronted the witch queen. They got into a terrible battle, and he banished her. He dug up his wife. The princes returned to the castle, and the farmer father was richly rewarded.
The king eventually meets another wonder with a young son-in-law, and she is lactating, so with her perpetrator, the king breastfeeds from her too, in private, for funding, unashamed.
Alright, I just woke up. Here's the story that my mom told us when we were growing up. About the 3 princes and with the stars on their foreheads. Once upon a time, there was a kingdom, and in the kingdom lived a king and a queen, and the queen was pregnant. And when she gave birth to 3 baby boys. And each of them were born with a weird birthmark on their foreheads. A little star on each of their foreheads. I always imagine it as a golden star, but maybe it was just a birthmark now that I think about it. But let's go with golden star, I think that's better. Each with a golden star on their foreheads. They were both surprised and relatively okay with it until an evil witch came to the castle and told them that the stars were a curse, that the stars would only bring terror to the kingdom and ruin. And so the king believed the witch and banished the 3 boys outside of the town.
Who are you talking to?
I'm reading the story of Hergia's thing.
What is it? Is it good?
What do you mean, is it good? Of course it's good. I'm reading the story. Okay, as I was saying, the king banished his 3 sons, or abandoned his 3 sons outside of the city, and he buried the queen under a bridge. I imagine it as a cold, stormy night, winter night. When the 3 boys who were abandoned were picked up by a farmer who saw 3 boys abandoned on the wayside, and he raised them. And oh my god, I just woke up and now there's a dog. The queen ended up marrying the king. The witch ended up marrying the king, and they took over the kingdom. Meanwhile, this farmer sees 3 boys on the side of the road, 3 baby boys on the side of the road, each with a star on their forehead. He takes them home and raises them as his own. And whenever he sends them to school in the city, he always makes them wear a bandana over their heads so that people don't recognize the birthmark. And so the boys grow up, and they start going to school in the city. When they go to the school in the city, they have to cross the bridge to get into town. And every time they crossed the bridge to get into town, a liquid would shoot out of the ground, and it would enter their mouths. It was kind of sweet. It was delicious. And they're really confused. They're like, why is this happening to us? We're just trying to go to school. And they go to school, and it just kept happening every time they went to the town. And so eventually they tell their farmer father about it. And they're like, every time we go into town, this liquid shoots out of the ground, and we taste it and it tastes sweet. We don't really know what's going on. And the farmer father says to them, well, actually, I haven't told you this, but I'm not your real father. I found you on the side of the road, and you're actually the three princes. Because at this point, the farmer had heard about what had happened to the three princes with the stars on their foreheads. And he wanted to keep them safe, so he didn't turn them in. And instead made them wear bandanas on their foreheads. And so the farmer father goes on, he says, the thing that's shooting into your mouths is the breast milk of your mother. She's buried underneath the bridge, and I think she's still alive, but whenever you pass, the breast milk shoots into your mouth, because she never got to do that with you. Yeah. And so, basically, and I hear the blender. Well, I forgot to tell the part about the mother also realizing this underneath the bridge. Her sons were passing overhead, because I think it's important to tell her side of the story. But anyways, the boys decide to go into town and reveal themselves. And so they go into town. They ask for an audience with the king, and they tell him, like, hey, we're sons. They take off their bandanas, and underneath their bandanas, the golden star birthmark on each of their foreheads, and the king is shocked, of course. But then he realizes what good sons there are, and then he tells them, the sons tell him about their mother underneath the bridge. And the king is like, oh my god, he's absolutely moved by this show of motherly love years after his terrible treatment of his whole family. And so he confronts the witch wife, and they get into a huge battle. I feel like there's a better part about this, but maybe the king just banishes the witch. I imagine her dying. And then he digs up his wife. Good job. And the boys move in. The farmer father is rewarded richly. And that's it. The end.
Blue and White were born to the mountain and mothered by the clouds. They each built a small shack near the summit. Blue spent her days on the roof, gaping wide with her mouth skyward, searching and waiting for rain. At night, she climbed down and slept inside under heavy blankets to escape the wind. White wouldn't leave her shack under the direct light of sun above. She feared evaporation, so instead she lived out her evenings inside at the frame of her only window with an arm extended out, leaning her armpit against the frame, palm open, and waving slowly side to side to catch the moisture that would burn away with each morning. The summit was high enough that a descent was needed to reach the clouds. There was a footpath which hugged the curves of the mountain. Every year, after the sun had been called back from its gallop away, the first flowers had gingerly begun to reemerge, and the toads could be heard again at night. A small, warm glow from a cluster of candles could be discerned through the mist. And momentarily, Blue closed her mouth, turning over to peer over the gutters of her shack. White pulled in her hand, clutched the windowsill, and craned a neck out to notice the exotic warmth of color flickering below the mountain. They joined each other on the single path and approached the clouds below. Blue was rotund and sloshing, a belly like a full gourd. She had no arms. White's fingers were spindly and long enough to reach her knobby knees. They were still damp. As they met to walk side by side, a knowing glance was exchanged. Their black hair began to mingle and braid. White's hand extended to palm Blue's curvature. They descended. Their hot breaths replenished the clouds with one more year of rain, and their children were grateful.
Hey, Gia. Hey. So Gia and Sarah, can you guys talk about your thinking behind your myth reworkings?
Oh man, this is so funny. Do you mind? Should I go, Sarah?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, that my piece was the Word doc basically, and when we had this opportunity to revisit or to make pieces about myths, I immediately remembered this one myth that my mom used to tell me when I was a kid, that just in hindsight was just so batshit. And as you can hear, it's about, you know, royal identity being misplaced and like some miraculous breast milk that was squirted at the mouths of like 3 princes that revealed their true royal identity. But my background is in poetry, so when I was thinking about the myth, I also thought about this like conceptual poetry movement in France, and I think like this 60s or something, Oulipo, and they have this sort of exercise where you replace every noun with the 7th word following it in the dictionary called N+7, and it turned the myth into something that was like really perverse. So I just thought, you know, let's run with that, and yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how it happened. I think I was involved in the part where we tried replacing nouns in the myth with other words. And to me, it's sort of it creates this way to talk back to the text, even if that's in a ridiculous way or an angry way or a way that somehow answers these sort of beliefs that are in the myth. It's kind of like when Beatriz Santiago Muñoz said, stepping outside the thought, it seemed to me like the thought was the original myth, and stepping outside of it was sort of just literally changing the grammar into another kind of structure, although it follows the same structure, but using a rule to like to break down the story, and in a very experimental way, but it seemed like that experiment yielded a new kind of resistance in the new text.
That's great. Yeah.
Really good work, you guys.
It was so fun to hear it again and like have like parts of it kind of come back. It was like, oh yeah, the son of a photograph, you know, like it's like
And those images too are so beautiful.
Which one's Gabby's?
Well, the blue and the white.
Yeah. That was Gabby's, and a shout out to Emma. I don't know. I mean, that's Emma's voice, and I remember that they actually collaborated on that one. So I know Emma's not in this little yellow configuration, but I know that story went back and forth between Gabby and Emma as well. So yeah, I guess.
There she is.
Oh, Emma, talk to us. Suddenly.
Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, Gabby, I wish she was here to speak more about it. She had been toying with a myth from a small town in Mexico where she used to live, where I remember she wrote me and said that there's this town where the people believe that they're the descendants of the clouds, and that their ancestors were from the clouds, and that there was like a ritual every year of going to the summit of the mountain and performing something that would ensure rain would come the next year. And so yeah, the story was kind of just came out of, I guess, like thinking kind of in images for the first time, I think. And just looking up at the sky and imagining what are the clouds, what is rain, blue and white kind of mingling together. And I wanted it to be kind of, well, I don't know, as I wrote it, it was just becoming like a lesbian sex scene, and that was great for me. Gabby has been collecting images for a while, and I really loved the way that they treated them, and it was such a pleasure to work with her, and it was kind of unexpected, I think, what came out of it.
I mean, I'm sure I speak for everybody who's watching this work. Like, it's so beautiful to just be reminded of it. And like, the funny part is that the recreations of the myths feel more vital to me as a viewer than anything else. Like, so like this blue and white, and also the what is it? The tragedy of red or something, like, it's like those feel just like really alive to me visually, or audio. The translation is just that you guys have all done is really powerful. Thank you for sharing the work and speaking about it.
Thank you all. Thanks so much to our hosts and our generous guides, Sheilah and Dani ReStack, this has been such an experience, and thank you all for sticking with us through some of our technical difficulties, but hopefully it was worth it when we got there. I want to give a huge thanks to the UnionDocs team here. These are the wonderful folks that I have the pleasure to work with. Thank you so much to Jenny Miller, who's in the booth, to Allison S.M. Kobayashi, who cut all those segments, to Tara and Rafaela and Bradley and Kara, who are here tonight making this live event happen. Thanks to you all. As we wrap up, we have a poem to listen to.
Yeah, we're closing out with a feral domestic toast poem by Emily.
Paw or hoof, soft, tender, or rough with traverse. Rabbit bear hitches the touch of and dark blue sounds. I miswrote. I could, no, said the the hitch across touch. I could, no providence, no provenance, no provenance. Dark blue sounds. I was and didn't. I am afraid that, but look. The hiss across touch, no provenance. Rabbit paws or paws of the bear, said but look, dark blue sounds. Rabbit paws or paws of the bear, said the no provenance. I was and didn't. Hiss touch, hiss against, hiss across, touch against. My paws are paws of a bear, are rabbit paws. No providence, no provenance.
That was so beautiful. I love you guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good to be together.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you.
And thinking about this idea of what is feral domestic is also like what is available and how can you use what's available. And so there's this idea that the spaces that are domestic can be portals to something very much beyond this kind of like home as respite and away from the world, but like home as fantasy creation.